My name is Ford Walker, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew what peace felt like. After 4 decades as a respected jeweler in our town, retirement suited me just fine. The day my only daughter Amy married Jackson Reed seemed like the crown jewel of my golden years. Little did I know that beneath his charming smile lurked a thief waiting to rob his own family. When I caught him opening my safe one night, neither of us expected what he would find inside. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had that gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right. The year was 1978 when I opened my first jewelry shop in downtown Burlington. Back then, I was just a 20-year-old kid with nimble fingers and a passion for precious metals. My father had taught me everything about the trade, from distinguishing real gems from fakes with just a glance, to crafting the most delicate settings that would last generations. I had a natural talent, and within 5 years, Ford's Fine Jewelry became the go-to place in our county for engagement rings, anniversary gifts, and custom pieces. I met my wife Margaret at the shop when she came in to have her grandmother's necklace repaired. The clasp was broken, but I could tell the piece had sentimental value far beyond its modest gold content. I fixed it for free, and 2 years later, I was placing a wedding band I had crafted myself on her finger. We were young, in love, and had our whole lives ahead of us. Margaret gave birth to our daughter Amy in 1984. From the moment I held that tiny bundle in my arms, I knew my life's greatest treasure would never be locked in any safe. Amy had her mother's bright blue eyes and my stubborn determination, a combination that would prove both challenging and rewarding as she grew. Our family life was simple but fulfilling. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house just 10 minutes from the shop. Margaret taught elementary school, and I worked 6 days a week, always taking Sundays off to spend with my family. Those were precious days filled with picnics, fishing trips, and backyard barbecues with neighbors and friends. But life has a way of changing course without warning. When Amy was just 7 years old, Margaret was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. Despite every treatment available, she slipped away from us just 14 months later. At 35 years old, I became a widower and a single father to a heartbroken little girl who couldn't understand why her mommy wasn't coming back. Those first few years without Margaret were the hardest of my life. I would work all day at the shop, pick up Amy from her after-school program, cook dinner that rarely matched Margaret's recipes, help with homework, and then sit alone after Amy went to bed, wondering how I could possibly fill the void her mother had left. But for Amy's sake, I had to try. I did my best to be both mother and father to her. I learned to braid her hair, albeit not very well at first. I hosted sleepovers with her friends, baked cookies from box mixes for school events, and sat through countless dance recitals. I never missed a parent-teacher conference or a school play. The jewelry shop became Amy's second home, with a special corner set up with a desk where she would do her homework after school while I worked. As Amy grew into her teenage years, our bond strengthened. She became my assistant at the shop during summers, learning the trade just as I had from my father. She had a good eye for design and color, creating sketches that customers often preferred over mine. I was immensely proud of her, and despite the absence of her mother, Amy grew into a confident, intelligent young woman. By the time Amy graduated high school as valedictorian, the shop had expanded into a respected establishment with 3 full-time employees. When she was accepted to Cornell University to study business, I couldn't have been prouder. Though sending her off to college was bittersweet, I knew Margaret would have been overjoyed to see our daughter pursuing higher education. While Amy was at college, I continued to grow the business. By my mid-50s, Ford's Fine Jewelry had gained a reputation that extended beyond our state. We specialized in custom designs, particularly engagement rings that told the unique story of each couple who came to us. I had trained several apprentices over the years, including my nephew Thomas, who showed the same passion and precision that I had at his age. When I turned 62, I made the decision to semi-retire. I handed over the day-to-day operations of the shop to Thomas, though I maintained ownership and would still take on special commissions for long-time clients. I converted the guest bedroom in my home into a small workshop where I could continue to create without the pressures of running a business. In this workshop, I installed a safe to store the valuable materials and finished pieces I still worked with occasionally. My retirement gave me the freedom to pursue other interests that had taken a back seat during my working years. I expanded my vegetable garden, joined a fishing club that met every Thursday at the lake, and volunteered teaching jewelry making at the community center. I developed friendships with other retirees in the neighborhood, particularly with Bill Johnson, a former detective who lived 2 doors down and shared my passion for growing tomatoes and watching baseball. Life had a pleasant rhythm to it. Amy would visit during holidays and breaks from her marketing job in Boston, where she had moved after college graduation. We would spend hours in my workshop, with me showing her new techniques and her bringing fresh ideas for designs. These were peaceful, fulfilling years, and I felt grateful for the life I had built despite the early loss of Margaret. I always kept some of my finest work in that home safe, along with family heirlooms that had both monetary and sentimental value. Margaret's wedding ring was there, as well as the first piece of jewelry I ever made, a delicate silver bracelet with a small pearl that my father had helped me create when I was just 10 years old. I also kept some important documents there: birth certificates, the deed to the house, insurance papers, and a detailed inventory of all the valuable pieces I had created over the years. Little did I know that this quiet, comfortable life I had built was about to be disrupted in ways I could never have imagined. All beginning with a phone call from Amy announcing she had met someone special. It was a crisp Sunday afternoon in October when Amy called with excitement bubbling in her voice. She had met someone named Jackson Reed at a marketing conference in Chicago just 6 weeks prior, and they had been inseparable ever since. She wanted to bring him home to meet me the following weekend. From the way she described him, an ambitious 32-year-old entrepreneur with his own digital marketing firm, I could tell she was completely smitten. I prepared for their visit with the care and attention to detail that had defined my career. I cleaned the house thoroughly, planned a menu of Amy's favorite foods, and even pulled out some of Margaret's old recipes. I wanted everything to be perfect for this first meeting with the man who had captured my daughter's heart so quickly. When they pulled up in a sleek black Audi, my first impression of Jackson was positive. He stood 6 feet tall with perfectly styled dark hair, wearing an expensive-looking suit that seemed almost too formal for a weekend in the suburbs. But his firm handshake and direct eye contact suggested confidence rather than arrogance. He presented me with an impressive bottle of scotch, mentioning he had researched the best brands before selecting it. During dinner, Jackson dominated the conversation with stories of his business successes, client acquisitions, and future expansion plans. He spoke with the polished charm of someone used to selling himself and his ideas. Amy sat beside him, gazing at him adoringly, occasionally adding details about how they met or laughing at his jokes. I noticed how she seemed different around him, a bit more reserved, laughing a beat after he did, watching his reactions before offering her own opinions. When I mentioned my background in jewelry, Jackson's interest noticeably peaked. He asked numerous questions about my career, the value of different materials, my most expensive commissions, and how I secured my inventory. At the time, I took his curiosity as genuine interest in my profession and as an attempt to connect with me through my life's work. As the weekend progressed, Jackson seemed to make an effort to win me over. He complimented my home, admired my workshop with seemingly genuine appreciation for the craftsmanship of my tools, and listened attentively when I shared stories about Amy's childhood. He even joined Bill and me for a few hours of fishing, though his pristine loafers and designer jeans looked out of place at the lakeside. Before they left that Sunday evening, Amy pulled me aside while Jackson loaded their bags into the car. Her eyes were bright with hopeful anticipation as she whispered, "What do you think, Dad? Isn't he amazing?" I hugged her and said I was happy if she was happy. It wasn't exactly the enthusiastic endorsement she was looking for, but something about Jackson left me reserving judgment. Perhaps it was the practiced way he told his stories, or how his smile never quite reached his eyes when he thought no one was looking. But I kept these thoughts to myself, not wanting to dampen Amy's obvious happiness. Just 3 months later, Amy called again, this time to announce their engagement. Jackson had proposed with a diamond ring that, as a professional, I immediately recognized as impressive in size, but lacking in quality craftsmanship. Amy sent me photos, gushing about how Jackson had spared no expense. I offered congratulations while silently noting the setting would likely need repair within a year. They set the wedding date for June, giving them only 6 months to plan. Amy explained that Jackson wanted to get married quickly because of his busy schedule and upcoming business expansion. Everything seemed rushed, but Amy assured me they were making thoughtful decisions together. As the wedding approached, I saw less of Amy than during any other period of her adult life. When I called, she often seemed hurried or mentioned that Jackson needed her help with something. The few times she visited alone, she spoke almost exclusively about Jackson's business ventures or the expensive items they were registering for. The Amy I knew, who had once been passionate about art, literature, and creating things by hand, seemed to be fading into someone whose identity was increasingly tied to her fiancé's world. For the wedding, I offered to create a special piece of jewelry for Amy to wear. After some hesitation, she agreed, and I crafted a delicate necklace with a blue sapphire pendant that matched Margaret's wedding ring. I also decided to give Amy her mother's jewelry collection as a wedding present. These pieces weren't just valuable in terms of their gold and gem content. They represented our family history and the love Margaret and I had shared. I wanted Amy to have these tangible connections to her mother on her wedding day. The wedding itself was larger and more lavish than I had expected, with over 300 guests, many of whom seemed to be Jackson's business contacts rather than personal friends. I felt out of place among the crowd of sharply dressed urban professionals, despite wearing my best suit. During the reception, I noticed Jackson spent more time networking with potential clients than celebrating with his new wife. When I presented Amy with the blue sapphire necklace and her mother's jewelry collection before the ceremony, tears filled her eyes. For a moment, I saw my daughter again, not the polished woman in designer clothes who had been planning this event, but the sensitive, appreciative person I had raised. Jackson walked in during this moment, and I didn't miss how his eyes lingered on the jewelry box, quickly calculating its value before offering appropriate remarks about family heirlooms and traditions. After the honeymoon, a 2-week trip to the Maldives that Jackson documented extensively on social media, Amy and Jackson purchased a house just 20 minutes from mine. This proximity was Amy's idea, and I was grateful for it, hoping we would see each other regularly. Jackson had initially pushed for moving to Chicago to expand his business, but Amy had convinced him that staying near me was important to her. The first few months after they settled into their new home, the visits were frequent. Jackson would often accompany Amy, and on the surface, everything seemed fine. But I began to notice subtle shifts in their dynamic when they were in my home. Jackson would ask pointed questions about my workshop, my safe, and whether I still kept valuable materials at home. He seemed particularly interested in which pieces I had given Amy and their approximate value. One evening, when Amy stepped out to take a work call, Jackson casually mentioned that he was considering investing in precious metals and wondered if I could show him my inventory management system. The request seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made me uneasy. I gave vague answers, mentioning that most of my valuable stock was now at the shop with Thomas. As autumn turned to winter, Amy began traveling for work more frequently. Jackson would sometimes call to check in on me during these periods, offering to stop by for dinner or to help with household tasks. His apparent thoughtfulness didn't align with the calculating expression I occasionally caught when he thought I wasn't looking. During these solo visits, he would inevitably steer our conversations toward my career, asking about the most valuable pieces I had created, how much raw material I kept at home, and whether I had ever experienced theft or security concerns. The day I first noticed something amiss in my workshop was a Tuesday in January. Amy had been in Chicago for a conference since Sunday, and Jackson had stopped by the previous evening, bringing dinner and staying late to watch a basketball game. The change was subtle, a few tools slightly out of place, the drawer containing my design sketches not fully closed. Anyone else might have attributed it to their own forgetfulness, but 40 years of meticulous organization in my profession had made me acutely aware of the placement of every item in my workspace. That evening, I called Bill, my former detective neighbor, and shared my growing concerns over a glass of whiskey on his back porch. Bill listened carefully, then suggested I might want to install a small, discreet security camera in my workshop. "Not to catch anyone doing anything," he said carefully, "but for your peace of mind and to rule out any misunderstandings." The following day, he helped me set up a system that would record any movement in my workshop and send alerts to my phone. The security camera in my workshop provided more insight than I had anticipated. While reviewing the footage from a day when Jackson had visited while I was briefly out shopping, I observed him methodically examining my workspace. He opened drawers, studied my sketches, and spent several minutes inspecting the safe in the corner. His movements were purposeful, not the casual browsing of someone merely curious about their father-in-law's hobby. I didn't confront him with this discovery. Instead, I began paying closer attention to other details I might have previously overlooked. I noticed small items occasionally went missing: a pair of sizing pliers, a digital scale I used for weighing metals, a small container of silver solder. None of these items was particularly valuable, but they were all useful for someone attempting to assess or modify jewelry. During this period, I also observed changes in Amy. My once vibrant daughter seemed increasingly stressed and distracted during our visits. She would check her phone constantly, as if afraid of missing a message from Jackson. When I asked about her marketing job, she gave vague responses, mentioning that she was between projects or considering a change. On the rare occasions when she visited without Jackson, she seemed more relaxed initially but would grow anxious as the time approached for her to return home. One afternoon, Amy arrived unexpectedly at my house, her eyes red from crying. When I asked what was wrong, she hesitated before admitting that she and Jackson had been arguing about money. According to Amy, his business was experiencing temporary cash flow issues, but he refused to cut back on their lifestyle expenses. She was worried about their mounting credit card debt but felt powerless to address it with him directly. This conversation triggered my memory of something Bill had mentioned during one of our talks. Bill had a nephew who worked in finance in Boston, and he had vaguely recalled hearing Jackson Reed's name in a negative context. After Amy left, I called Bill and asked if he could discreetly look into Jackson's business and financial background. 3 days later, Bill arrived at my door with a grim expression and a folder of printed documents. Through his contacts, he had discovered troubling information. Jackson's digital marketing company, which he had described as thriving with clients across the country, was actually struggling significantly. Several former clients had filed complaints about unfulfilled services, and there was evidence of possible fraudulent billing practices. Moreover, Jackson had a history of failed business ventures in 2 other states, each following a similar pattern of initial success, followed by sudden collapse amid customer complaints. Even more concerning was the discovery that Jackson had substantial personal debt beyond the business issues. He had maxed out multiple credit cards, had a history of late payments on luxury car leases, and had recently been denied a business loan due to his credit history. The lavish lifestyle he presented was built on an increasingly unstable financial foundation. As I processed this disturbing information, other pieces began falling into place. I recalled how Jackson had reacted when I mentioned my upcoming lunch with Thomas to discuss the jewelry store's quarterly finances. Jackson had immediately asked pointed questions about the shop's profitability, inventory value, and insurance coverage. At the time, I had attributed his interest to a businessman's natural curiosity, but now it seemed more calculated. I decided to increase security measures without alerting Jackson to my suspicions. I changed the combination on my safe and installed a secondary hidden locking mechanism that would be difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the safe to detect. I also began keeping a detailed log of every item in my workshop, photographing the arrangement of tools and materials daily. The next time Jackson visited alone, claiming he was in the neighborhood and thought he would stop by, I deliberately left him alone in the house for a few minutes while I retrieved the mail. Through the security app on my phone, I watched him immediately head to my workshop and try the safe, becoming visibly frustrated when the old combination no longer worked. When I returned, he was back in the living room, casually browsing a magazine as if he had been there the entire time. "Everything okay, Jackson?" I asked innocently. "Perfect," he replied with that practiced smile. "Just catching up on some reading while waiting for you." That evening after he left, I received a call from Amy. Her voice was tense as she asked if I had recently changed the combination to my safe. When I asked why she wanted to know, she hesitated before saying, "Jackson mentioned you might have some documents we need for our tax filing, and he thought they might be in your safe." "What documents would those be?" I asked, keeping my tone light despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "I'm not sure exactly," Amy admitted. "Something about the gift values for tax purposes? Jackson handles all our finances." I assured her I would look for any relevant documents and bring them over myself, rather than giving her the new combination as she had hinted was Jackson's preference. After hanging up, I sat in my workshop for a long time, staring at the safe and trying to decide how to protect both my daughter and myself from whatever Jackson was planning. 2 weeks passed with no unusual incidents, though I noticed Jackson had become more distant during family visits, often claiming work emergencies that required him to step outside for phone calls. Amy seemed increasingly on edge, checking her phone constantly and apologizing for Jackson's distraction. Then came a Wednesday evening that confirmed my worst fears. I had been invited to Thomas's home for dinner, and Amy knew about this standing monthly engagement. As I was leaving Thomas's house around 9:30, I received an alert on my phone from the security system. Someone was in my workshop. Instead of going directly home, I parked a block away and called Bill, explaining the situation. He offered to meet me at my house as backup, but suggested I wait until he arrived before entering. As we approached my house together, we could see lights on in the area of my workshop. Bill, ever the professional, suggested we enter quietly through the back door to assess the situation before confronting anyone. The security footage later showed that Jackson had arrived at my house around 9:15, letting himself in with the spare key Amy had. He went straight to my workshop and began a methodical search, starting with my desk drawers and moving to the bookshelf where I kept records. When these yielded nothing of apparent value to him, he turned his attention once again to the safe. What the footage didn't capture, but what Bill and I witnessed firsthand, was Jackson on the phone, his voice frustrated as he said, "I'm telling you, the old man has to have it somewhere. No one in the jewelry business for 40 years walks away with nothing to show for it. I just need more time to find where he's hiding the real stash." Bill motioned for me to stay back as we listened, both of us processing the implications of what we were hearing. Jackson wasn't just looking for documents or a few pieces of jewelry. He believed I had significant assets hidden away and was determined to find them, regardless of the damage it might cause to his marriage or his relationship with me. As we continued to watch silently from the hallway, Jackson ended his call and resumed his search with increasing desperation, pulling books from shelves and emptying drawers. When he found nothing, he returned to the safe, this time with a small electronic device I recognized as a tool used to detect vibrations when turning safe dials, a professional safe-cracking tool not available in ordinary retail stores. At this point, Bill whispered that we should call the police, but I hesitated. This was still my son-in-law, still Amy's husband. Before involving law enforcement, I wanted to understand the full extent of what we were dealing with. So we continued to observe as Jackson worked on my safe with surprising proficiency for someone who claimed no experience with security systems. After about 20 minutes of effort, he managed to get the safe open, apparently having figured out the new combination through his device. What he didn't know was that the most valuable items had been removed weeks ago when I first suspected something was amiss. Instead, the safe now contained very different contents that would soon change everything. The night Jackson chose to break into my safe was cold and quiet, with a light snow falling outside my bedroom window. I had been anticipating this moment for weeks, carefully preparing for what I believed was inevitable. That evening, I had made a show of taking my usual sleeping pill with a glass of water while Amy and Jackson were visiting for dinner. I mentioned several times how the medication knocked me out completely within an hour, and that I wouldn't wake until morning once it took effect. "You could throw a party in the house and I wouldn't hear a thing," I joked as they were leaving, noticing how Jackson's eyes flickered with interest at this information. Amy kissed me goodbye, mentioning she had an early flight to Philadelphia the next morning for a client meeting. Jackson shook my hand firmly, suggesting he might stop by the following evening to check on me since Amy would be away. I thanked him for his thoughtfulness while recognizing the calculated intention behind his offer. After they left, I went through my normal evening routine, making sure the security cameras were functioning properly and that the special preparations in my workshop were complete. Instead of taking my sleeping pill, I placed it under my tongue and later disposed of it. I dimmed all the lights except for a small lamp in the living room, which I would typically leave on until I went to bed. Then I settled into the darkness of my bedroom, fully clothed, and waited. The house creaked and settled in the cold night air as the hours passed. My old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, then midnight. At 12:30, my phone vibrated silently beside me, an alert from the security system indicating movement at the front door. Jackson was right on schedule. I watched through the security app as he used a key to enter quietly, closing the door behind him with practiced care to avoid making noise. He stood in the entryway for almost a full minute, listening for any signs that I might be awake. Satisfied with the silence, he moved through the house with surprising familiarity, avoiding the creaky floorboard near the kitchen that even Amy sometimes forgot about. The infrared camera showed his path clearly as he made his way directly to my workshop. He didn't bother checking if I was asleep in my bedroom, confirming my suspicion that his visit had nothing to do with concern for my welfare and everything to do with what he believed was in my safe. In the workshop, Jackson first checked the desk drawers, presumably looking for the safe combination or keys. Finding nothing helpful there, he moved methodically around the room, checking behind pictures and under furniture spots where someone might hide valuable items. His movements were precise and practiced, suggesting this wasn't the first time he had searched for hidden valuables. Finally, he turned his attention to the drawer where I kept various tools and supplies. This drawer had a false bottom, which I had intentionally made easier to detect than a professional would have done. Jackson found it within minutes, sliding the panel back to reveal what appeared to be a small notebook and a key ring. The notebook contained what looked like combinations and security codes, all fictitious except for one, the current combination to my safe. I had planted this information, knowing that finding it would give Jackson a false sense of accomplishment and prevent him from looking for other means to open the safe. The key ring held several keys, including one that would open the first lock on my safe. I continued watching through the app as Jackson approached the safe with growing excitement. He tried the combination written in the notebook, turning the dial with careful precision. When the first lock clicked open, his shoulders relaxed slightly with satisfaction. He then used the key to unlock the secondary lock, swinging the heavy door open with anticipation clear in his posture. The moment Jackson looked inside the safe, his entire body language transformed. His shoulders stiffened, his head jerked back slightly, and he reached out to steady himself against the wall. Even in the greenish glow of the night vision camera, I could see the blood drain from his face as he stared at the contents of my safe, contents he clearly had not expected to find. Instead of the valuable jewelry, gold, or cash he had been expecting, Jackson found himself looking at a comprehensive file of his own misdeeds. Over the past months, with Bill's help, I had compiled a thorough documentation of Jackson's fraudulent business practices, credit card debt, and the lawsuits filed against him in other states. There were printouts of emails he had sent to potential victims, records of money transfers to offshore accounts, and photographs of him meeting with individuals who were known to fence stolen goods. But perhaps most damning of all was the small section dedicated to his infidelity. Through connections Bill had maintained from his detective days, we had obtained irrefutable evidence that Jackson had been having an affair with his administrative assistant for at least 6 months. Photographs and hotel receipts and text message transcripts that would break Amy's heart but might ultimately save her from a far worse fate. As Jackson frantically flipped through the documents, his shock gave way to panic. He pulled out his phone, presumably to call his accomplice, then thought better of it and shoved it back in his pocket. He began grabbing handfuls of papers, seemingly uncertain whether to try to destroy the evidence or take it with him. At this point, I decided it was time to make my presence known. I had seen enough, and the camera had recorded everything I needed. I quietly got up from my bed and made my way toward the workshop, careful to avoid making any noise that would alert Jackson to my approach. I paused in the hallway, taking a deep breath and preparing myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Through the slightly open door, I could see Jackson stuffing documents into his jacket pockets, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. His face showed a mixture of fear, anger, and desperation, emotions I had never seen him display beneath his carefully cultivated charm. Pushing the door fully open, I flipped on the light switch, flooding the room with sudden brightness. Jackson spun around, papers clutched in his hands, his eyes wide with shock and something else, guilt. "Finding everything you need, Jackson?" I asked calmly, leaning against the doorframe as if this midnight encounter was entirely expected. His reaction was everything I had anticipated and more. This would be a night neither of us would ever forget, though for vastly different reasons. "Ford," Jackson gasped, papers still clutched in his hands. For perhaps the first time since I had known him, he was completely unguarded, his practiced charm nowhere to be found. I thought I heard something, and I was checking if you were okay." "At midnight? Using my safe combination?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger and disappointment churning inside me. I gestured toward the security camera in the corner of the room. "And all of this is being recorded, by the way. Has been for weeks now." Jackson's eyes darted to the camera, then back to me, his mind visibly racing through possible explanations and escape routes. The documents in his hands apparently forgotten for the moment. "I see you've found my research project," I continued, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind me. "I've been quite busy learning about my son-in-law. Turns out there's a lot about you that Amy and I never knew." Jackson quickly tried to recover his composure, straightening his posture and forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the tense atmosphere of the room. "This is all a misunderstanding. Amy asked me to get some documents from your safe for our insurance. At midnight? Without calling first? While she's supposedly preparing for an early flight tomorrow?" I shook my head slowly. "Let's not insult each other's intelligence, Jackson. Why don't we talk about what's really going on here?" I gestured to the chair by my workbench, but Jackson remained standing, his back now pressed against the wall next to the open safe. I could see him calculating his options, weighing whether denial, aggression, or charm would serve him best in this situation. I had no intention of making the choice easy for him. "Those papers you're holding," I said, nodding toward the documents crumpled in his grip, "detail your outstanding debts to 3 different credit card companies, totaling just over $70,000. The folder still in the safe has records of the complaints filed against your company in Illinois and Wisconsin before you conveniently changed your business name and moved east." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his eyes now fixed on me with a coldness I had glimpsed only occasionally before. "And then there's the brown envelope," I continued. "That contains 46 photographs of you with a woman who isn't my daughter. Based on the timestamps, you were meeting with her at the Parkview Hotel, even while you were planning your wedding to Amy." "You had no right," Jackson finally spoke, his voice a low growl of anger. "No right to investigate me, to spy on me. And you had no right to marry my daughter under false pretenses," I countered, maintaining my calm demeanor, "or to enter my home with the intention of stealing from me. So I think we're well beyond discussing rights at this point, don't you?" I moved closer to the safe, forcing Jackson to step aside or risk physical contact. He chose to move, revealing more of the safe's contents as he did so. Inside, beyond the files and photographs, was a small digital recorder. "That device has been recording your phone conversations whenever you've been in this house," I explained, noting with satisfaction how Jackson's face paled further. "Including that interesting call 3 weeks ago, where you told someone named Marcus that you were working on the old man and expected to clean him out soon." "That's illegal," Jackson protested, finding his voice again. "You can't record private conversations without consent. In this state, you need only one party's consent," I informed him, grateful for Bill's knowledge of surveillance laws. "And since the conversations took place in my home, using my Wi-Fi connection, there's a strong argument to be made that I was a party to those communications. But by all means, let's call the police and have them sort it out. I'm sure they'd be very interested in reviewing all of this evidence." The mention of police visibly rattled Jackson. He quickly changed tactics, his expression softening into the charming, reasonable persona I had grown familiar with. "Look, Ford, I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. Yes, my business has had some challenges, and yes, I've made some personal mistakes." He attempted a self-deprecating smile that came across as more of a grimace. "But I love Amy. Everything I've done has been to build a better life for us, for our future." "By planning to rob her father?" I asked incredulously. "By cheating on her before you were even married? Those actions show love?" Jackson's facade cracked slightly, annoyance flashing across his features before he could suppress it. Financial pressure makes people do things they wouldn't normally consider. "If you knew the stress I've been under trying to keep my business afloat while maintaining the lifestyle Amy deserves." "The lifestyle you convinced her she needed," I interrupted. "The luxury car, the oversized house, the designer clothes, none of that mattered to Amy before she met you. You created expectations you couldn't fulfill, and then decided stealing from family was the solution." For a moment, genuine shame seemed to cross Jackson's face, quickly replaced by calculation. "What do you want, Ford? Money? I can't give you that right now, obviously. So what is this about? Revenge? Punishing me for not being good enough for your precious daughter?" "This is about truth, Jackson. Amy deserves to know who she really married." I gestured to the safe. "All of this, every document, every photograph, every recording, is evidence of the choices you've made. Choices that directly affect my daughter's life and future." Jackson's expression hardened again, and he took a step toward me, his body language subtly threatening despite the calm tone he maintained. "If you show any of this to Amy, you'll destroy her. Is that what you want? To see your daughter heartbroken, her marriage ruined?" "Her marriage is already ruined," I replied quietly. "You ruined it with every lie, every betrayal. I'm just making sure she has all the information she needs to make decisions about her future, decisions that should be hers, not yours or mine." Jackson moved suddenly, reaching past me toward the safe, presumably to grab more of the incriminating documents. I reacted instinctively, catching his arm and pushing him back. Despite the nearly 30-year age difference between us, I was still strong from decades of physical work, and Jackson clearly hadn't expected resistance. "Don't," I warned him, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "This evidence isn't going anywhere except to Amy, and possibly to the authorities, depending on what she wants to do." Jackson's eyes narrowed, and I saw something dangerous flash in them, something that made me grateful for the security camera recording our every move, and for Bill waiting nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. "You've been planning this ambush for weeks," Jackson accused, gesturing to the safe and the camera. "Setting me up, making me look like a criminal." "You did that all on your own," I replied evenly. "I just documented it." The standoff continued for several tense moments, neither of us willing to back down. Then, unexpectedly, we both heard the sound that changed everything, the front door opening, followed by Amy's voice calling out, "Dad? Jackson? Why are all the lights on?" Amy's voice broke the tension in the room like a thunderclap. Jackson's eyes widened in panic, darting between me and the doorway. I could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating how to control this situation before it spiraled completely beyond his grasp. "In here, Amy," I called out, never taking my eyes off Jackson. In my workshop, Jackson leaned toward me, his voice an urgent whisper. "Think about what you're doing, Ford. This will devastate her. We can work something out between us, men." "Too late for that," I replied quietly as Amy's footsteps approached. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her coat, confusion evident on her face. "What's going on? Jackson, you said you were going straight home after dropping me at Lindsay's." She looked between us, noting the open safe, the scattered papers in Jackson's hands, and the unmistakable tension in the room. "Dad, what is this?" Before I could respond, Jackson shifted his entire demeanor, his expression morphing into one of righteous indignation. "Your father has been spying on me, Amy. He's got some crazy idea that I'm trying to steal from him." He gestured to the safe. "He's been collecting information, recording my calls, having me followed apparently." Amy's face registered shock as she turned to me. "Dad, is this true?" "Parts of it, yes," I admitted, maintaining my calm. "But there's more to the story, much more." Jackson quickly moved to Amy's side, placing his arm around her shoulders possessively. "He doesn't approve of me, never has. Now he's trying to drive a wedge between us with wild accusations." I could see Amy's confusion deepening, torn between the two men she loved most. This was exactly the scenario I had hoped to avoid by confronting Jackson alone. But now that we were here, I had no choice but to proceed carefully. "Amy," I said gently, "I need you to look at some things before you make any judgments. Can you do that for me?" Jackson tightened his grip on her shoulders. "You don't need to see his so-called evidence. It's all taken out of context, misrepresented to make me look bad." Amy looked up at her husband, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. "If there's nothing to worry about, then what's the harm in looking?" I moved to the safe and retrieved the most important folder, the one containing the financial records and proof of Jackson's affair. As I turned back toward them, Jackson made a sudden lunge for the documents. I sidestepped, quicker than he anticipated for a man my age, and he stumbled forward, catching himself against the workbench. "Jackson!" Amy exclaimed, startled by his aggressive move. "He's manipulating everything," Jackson insisted, his composure cracking further. "Whatever he shows you is going to be twisted to fit his narrative." I held the folder out to Amy. "These are facts, not narratives. Bank statements, credit reports, photographs, and recordings. All I'm asking is that you review them and make your own decisions." Amy hesitated, looking between the folder and Jackson's increasingly agitated expression. Something in his demeanor must have triggered her suspicions, because she slowly reached for the folder, despite his objections. "Amy, don't," Jackson warned, his voice hardening. "If you take that folder, you're choosing him over me. Is that what you want?" I watched my daughter straighten her shoulders, a flash of her mother's strength showing through. "I'm choosing the truth, whatever it is," she said, taking the folder from my hands. As Amy began reviewing the contents, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to deep hurt. Jackson paced the small room like a caged animal, alternating between watching her reactions and glaring at me accusingly. "These credit card statements," Amy said after several minutes of silent review. $70,000 in debt, and these are all recent charges?" She looked up at Jackson. "You told me we were financially secure, that the business was thriving." "Temporary cash flow issues," Jackson insisted. "Every business goes through them. Your father is making this seem worse than it is." "And these lawsuits from your previous clients?" Amy continued, her voice growing stronger as anger began replacing hurt. "3 different cases alleging fraud? You never mentioned any legal problems." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Disgruntled clients who didn't understand the contracts they signed. The cases were dismissed. "Actually," I interjected, "they were settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. There's a significant difference." Amy continued paging through the documents, her movements becoming more agitated until she reached the photographs. She stared at them for a long moment, her face draining of color. "This is Megan, your assistant." Her voice was barely audible. "These are from March. We were planning our wedding in March." Jackson switched tactics immediately, his tone becoming pleading. "It was a mistake, Amy. A terrible mistake that meant nothing. I was stressed about the wedding, about finances. It was just physical, never emotional. You're the one I love." Amy closed the folder slowly, her hands trembling slightly. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her face, but there was also a resolute set to her jaw that reminded me powerfully of her mother. "How long have you known about this, Dad?" she asked, ignoring Jackson's continued protestations. "I've been gathering information for about 2 months," I admitted. "After I noticed things missing from my workshop and saw Jackson examining my safe on the security camera." Amy nodded, absorbing this. "And tonight? What happened tonight?" I pretended to take my sleeping pill and waited. "Jackson let himself in around 12:30 and went straight to my workshop. He found the safe combination I had planted and opened it, expecting to find valuables, I assume. Instead, he found all of this." I gestured to the folder in her hands. "Jackson made one final desperate attempt to regain control. He set me up, Amy. Can't you see that? He left out the combination, practically invited me to open the safe. This whole thing was an elaborate trap." Amy turned to him, her expression hardening. "So, you admit you came here in the middle of the night to open my father's safe without permission? How exactly does that justify anything?" Jackson seemed to realize he had backed himself into a corner. His demeanor changed once again, this time to cold anger. "You know what? Fine. Yes, I came here looking for valuables. Your father made millions in the jewelry business, and all I wanted was our fair share." "Our share?" Amy repeated incredulously. "You were planning to steal from my father and call it our share?" "Don't act so innocent," Jackson snapped, his charming facade completely gone now. "You've enjoyed every benefit of my business acumen. The house, the cars, the vacations, all of it requires money. Money your precious father has plenty of but keeps locked away." I remained silent, allowing Amy to process Jackson's true nature without my interference. She stood straighter, wiping tears from her cheeks with resolute swipes. "I want you out of my father's house," she said firmly. "Now, and I want your keys to both our house and my father's." Jackson laughed bitterly. "You can't be serious. You're throwing away our marriage over some financial issues and one mistake?" "Financial issues?" Amy's voice rose. "You've accumulated massive debt in both our names. You've committed fraud. You've cheated on me. And tonight, you broke into my father's home with the intention of robbing him. These aren't issues, Jackson. They're crimes." For a moment, I thought Jackson might become physically aggressive. His fists clenched at his sides, and his face flushed with anger. I moved slightly closer to Amy, ready to intervene if necessary. "Give me the keys, Jackson," Amy repeated, holding out her hand. After a tense standoff, Jackson reached into his pocket and threw his key ring onto the floor at Amy's feet. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening as he looked between us. "You'll regret this, both of you." "The only thing I regret," Amy replied steadily, "is not seeing you for who you really are sooner." Jackson turned abruptly and stormed out of the workshop. We heard his angry footsteps through the house, followed by the front door slamming with enough force to rattle the windows. In the sudden silence that followed, Amy's composure finally broke. She collapsed into the chair by my workbench, her body shaking with sobs. I moved to her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, uncertain if she would welcome comfort from me after what had just transpired. To my relief, she reached up and grasped my hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered through her tears. "Thank you for showing me the truth, even though it hurts." I knelt beside her chair, ignoring the protest from my aging knees, and pulled her into a hug just as I had done countless times throughout her childhood. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I wish it could have been different." As we sat there in my workshop, surrounded by the evidence of Jackson's betrayal, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the truth was finally out, sadness for Amy's pain, and apprehension about what Jackson's parting threat might mean for our future. But underneath it all was a certainty that we had done the right thing, and that together we would find a way forward. The weeks following that fateful night were among the most difficult of our lives. Amy moved back into her childhood bedroom, bringing only essential items from the house she had shared with Jackson. The first few days, she barely spoke, moving through the house like a ghost, her eyes red, rimmed, and vacant. I gave her space while making sure she ate and knew I was there whenever she needed me. On the third day, Amy found me in the garden and asked to see all the evidence I had gathered. We spent hours at the kitchen table, going through every document, photograph, and recording. There were moments when she had to step away, overcome by fresh waves of grief and betrayal, but she insisted on seeing everything. "I need to understand the full extent of what happened," she explained. "No more illusions." The financial situation was even worse than I had initially discovered. Jackson had taken out loans in Amy's name without her knowledge, leveraging their jointly owned house. Their shared credit cards were maxed out, and he had even borrowed money from several of Amy's friends under the pretense of planning a surprise anniversary trip. The total debt approached $120,000. After consulting with a lawyer specializing in divorce and financial fraud, Amy filed for both divorce and an emergency financial separation to prevent Jackson from accumulating more debt in her name. She also filed a police report regarding the unauthorized loans, though she hesitated to press charges for the attempted theft from my safe, concerned about the public humiliation a trial would bring. We heard from Jackson only through increasingly hostile legal communications. His initial strategy of pleading for reconciliation quickly gave way to threats and demands. When these proved ineffective, he resorted to spreading malicious stories among their social circle, claiming Amy had cheated on him and that I had manipulated her into leaving the marriage. Fortunately, the evidence we had gathered, which Amy shared with her closest friends, quickly put those rumors to rest. Approximately 1 month after the confrontation, Bill called to inform us that Jackson had been arrested in connection with a fraudulent investment scheme targeting elderly clients. Several victims had come forward after a business associate of Jackson's was caught trying to cash forged checks. This development added another layer to the legal complications of Amy's divorce, but also provided additional leverage for her attorney. Throughout this difficult period, I watched my daughter display a strength and resilience that made me profoundly proud. She took responsibility for her financial situation, working with credit counselors to develop a repayment plan for the debts that could not be legally separated from her. She reached out to her former employer and secured a position that allowed her to work remotely from our home while she rebuilt her life. And most importantly, she began therapy to process the betrayal and learn from the experience. I keep asking myself how I missed the signs. She confessed to me one evening as we sat on the porch swing, a habit we had developed in the months since her return. He was showing me who he was all along, but I was too enchanted by the fantasy he created to see it. "We believe what we want to believe sometimes," I replied, thinking of how I too had initially ignored my misgivings about Jackson, especially when someone is skilled at presenting exactly what we hope to see. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, with Jackson serving a 3-year sentence for fraud, Amy had made remarkable progress in rebuilding her life. She had moved into a modest apartment nearby, was thriving in her career, and had even begun cautiously dating again, though she joked that any future boyfriends would have to pass the dad investigation before things got serious. As for me, the experience had taught me valuable lessons about trust, vigilance, and the importance of acting on intuition. I had installed a more comprehensive security system in my home, moved my most valuable items to a bank vault, and become more selective about who I allowed into my personal space. These were prudent precautions, but I was careful not to let the experience make me bitter or suspicious of everyone. One sunny afternoon in October, exactly 1 year after the night of the confrontation, Amy invited me to dinner at her apartment. When I arrived, I was surprised to find not only Amy but also Bill and his wife, Thomas and his family, and several of Amy's close friends. The apartment was decorated with streamers and a banner reading "Freedom Anniversary." "What's all this?" I asked as Amy handed me a glass of champagne. "We're celebrating," she explained, her smile more genuine than I had seen in a long time. 1 year of truth and freedom, 1 year of rebuilding. And most importantly, she raised her glass 1 year of living authentically, without deception or fear. As the small gathering toasted, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Despite the pain and difficulties of the past year, something valuable had emerged from the wreckage of Amy's marriage. She had discovered her own strength. I had reinforced my commitment to protecting those I loved, and we had both learned that the most precious things in life cannot be kept in any safe. Later that evening, as guests were leaving, Amy pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly, "not just for exposing Jackson, but for how you did it. You gathered evidence, you waited for the right moment, you let me see the truth for myself instead of just telling me what to believe. You respected me enough to let me make my own decisions, even when it would have been easier to just chase him away." I embraced my daughter, remembering the little girl who had once needed me to check under the bed for monsters, and marveling at the strong woman she had become. "The greatest gift we can give those we love is the truth," I told her, "even when that truth is painful. Everything else is built on sand." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how Jackson's attempt to rob me had ultimately revealed the true treasures in my life, treasures that could never be stolen. My relationship with my daughter, our mutual trust and respect, and the resilience we both possessed. What Jackson had found in my safe that night wasn't what he expected, but it was exactly what was needed to free Amy from a life of deception and to remind me that even at 67, I could still protect what mattered most. The jewelry I had crafted throughout my career had brought beauty and joy to many people, but no precious metal or gemstone could compare to the value of honesty, integrity, and genuine love. These were the true legacy I hoped to leave Amy, long after any material possessions had lost their luster. Have you ever had that gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right? Or have you ignored your intuition and later regretted it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder about the importance of trusting their instincts. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most valuable things in life aren't things at all, they're the authentic connections we build with others.